Chapter 5. Inhibition and Sleep, Natural and Induced. I now resume the discussion of the phenomena of inhibition for the purpose of considering the question, does not this subjective power of inhibition afford a valid explanation of the mysterious phenomena of sleep, natural and induced? Much has been written on the subject of cerebral anatomy and histology, and scientists are in practical accord as to the general structure of the brain and the functions it performs during waking hours. All are agreed that sleep is a condition of rest of the nervous system, during which there is a renewal of the energy that has been expended during the hours of wakefulness, and that sleep is promoted by fatigue of the nervous system. But no two of them agree as to what changes take place in the organism that produce the state of unconsciousness. Numerous hypotheses have been advanced to account for the phenomenon, but none have thus far proved to be in accord with all the facts in the case. Thus, it has been held by some that sleep is caused by cerebral congestion, that is, that the blood vessels of the brain are charged during sleep with an unusual amount of blood. Others have no difficulty in proving that during sleep the brain is in a comparatively bloodless condition, and that the blood in the encephalic vessels is not only diminished in quantity, but moves with diminished rapidity during. The conclusion was that increase of blood pressure tends to produce wakefulness, and decrease induces sleep. On the other hand, Mosso has shown that the amount of blood in the brain during sleep is constantly fluctuating from natural causes and environmental conditions, and that it may be experimentally increased and decreased within wide limits, without awakening the sleeper. Prayer held that it was due to the accumulation in the nerve centers as a result of fatigue of sarcolactic acid, but later experiments have demonstrated the incorrectness of the hypothesis. Flitcher labored to prove that a deficiency in the supply of oxygen to the brain was the cause of sleep, to which Professor McKendrick replied that such a theory implies that cerebral activity depends upon cerebral respiration, and that sleep must therefore be a kind of cerebral asphyxia. In fact, many other theories are extant, some of which postulate pathological conditions of the brain and nervous system to account for the phenomenon of unconsciousness. But it is safe to say that no hypothesis has yet been advanced that is sufficiently comprehensive to account for all the facts, and hence the present attitude of science is that of suspended judgment, awaiting further investigation. The question, then, recurs, does not the inhibitory power inherent in the subjective mind furnish a valid explanation of the phenomenon under consideration? It seems to me that the question answers itself in view of what we have already seen of the inhibitory potency of that intelligent, sleepless energy which presides over all the vital functions of the whole organism. It would be a work of supererogation to repeat what has already been said relating to the inhibitory powers of the subjective mind and the visible mechanism through which it operates, beyond reminding the reader that the subjective mind presides over all involuntary muscles, functions, and processes of the whole organism. Hence its power necessarily extends to every cell in the body, and, to be effective, it must include the power to restrain abnormal activity as well as the power to stimulate and promote normal functioning. They are correlative powers, and the existence of one necessarily implies the existence of the other, just as much as the power of an engineer to open the throttle valve of a locomotive implies the power to close it. Obviously, in either case, the exercise of one power in the absence of the other would end in disaster to the machine. The fact is, if we can once succeed in divesting our minds of all ideas of possible abnormal conditions precedent to sleep, and our imaginations of the glamour of mystery, romance, and superstition with which poets and other dreamers have invested it, we shall have no difficulty in correlating its phenomena with others not so mysterious, or, rather, not so conspicuously in evidence in their manifestations. To that end, we must begin by keeping separate, in our investigations, the psychological functions of the waking brain cells and their physiological functions when considered as a part of the physical structure. We shall then no longer be awed by the phenomenon of insensibility, nor wrought upon by the idea of a mind blotted out, nor harassed by the thought that sleep is the twin brother, or even the half-brother, of death. On the contrary, we shall find that the phenomenon called sleep is merely incidental to the operation of a universal psychological law which pertains alike to all the cells of the body. That law is that, under normal conditions, rest must always alternate with work in all vital processes and phenomena. Otherwise, speedy exhaustion and death necessarily follow. This is true of all the cells, as before remarked. Even the pulsating heart, Apparently working without intermission is in reality not doing so, as there are short intervals of relaxation between individual beats in which there is no expenditure of energy. The same is true of the other nerve centers, the continuous functioning of which is essential to life, for example, respiration and the distribution of blood. Aside from these, all the other nerve centers and their component can enjoy comparatively long intervals of rest. And this is true, presumably, without reference to their waking functions. I say presumably because the logical presumption is that all the cells which enjoy alternate periods of rest and work are governed by the same law. Besides, it is an inexorable rule of scientific induction that we must never needlessly multiply causes. I submit that there is neither a logical, a psychological, nor a physiological necessity for two hypotheses to account for the same phenomenon, one for brain cells and another for other cells. The object of inhibition is the same in all cases, namely, rest, and the mechanism is the same, the difference being one of degree. That is to say, the brain cells are the more abundantly provided with filamentary lines of intercommunication. But their functions are identical with those belonging to the humblest cell in the physical organism. That is, they are the instrumentalities for the transmission of intelligence and sensation from cell to cell, thus enabling the whole to act as one. It follows that the process of inhibition is the same. We have already seen that the retraction of these filamentary lines of intercommunication results in the isolation of the cells and the consequent induction of anesthesia. In other words, the functions of the cells are for the time being suspended. They no longer convey intelligence or sensation to their fellows, and they are therefore, to all intents and purposes, asleep, unconscious. I submit that if this is true of any one group of cells in the organism, it is true of the brain cells. To the long-mooted question, therefore, what are the specific changes in the organism that produce the state of unconsciousness? My tentative reply is, it is the isolation of the brain cells from physical contact with each other. Let us examine this question a little further with special reference to the brain cells, their functions, and their filamentary connections. We have already seen that the cells of the cerebral cortex are the depositories of memories, and that they are connected with each other by filaments similar in kind, and presumably in purpose, to those which connect the other cells of the body with their neighbors, or coadjutors in functional activity. Roughly speaking, we may say, by way of illustration, that each cell is the storehouse of a memory of an experience, or, let us say, of a fact, that may in due time be used in connection with other associated facts for purposes of induction. But before kindred facts or memories can be brought into actual association, a connection must be established between the various cells which contain them, and this is the office performed by the filamentary lines of communication already described. These filamentary lines may be termed the instruments of mental association, and they account for the tendency of a sensation, perception, feeling, volition, or thought to recall to consciousness others which have previously existed in consciousness with it or with states similar to it. In a word, the brain cells and their lines of communication with each other constitute the physical mechanism of induction, of correlation, or of association of ideas, the tendency in an active brain being for each cell to establish immediate connection with new and kindred ideas and to refunction on lines already established. In other words, these lines of communication constitute the mechanism which enables the brain cells to act as a unit, precisely as the filamentary connections between the cells of the body enable them to act in harmony, and live, move, and have their being as one. As we have already seen, when the connections between the cells of the body are operative, intelligence and sensation are communicable, but when from any cause they are withdrawn, all sensation is inhibited, anesthesia results, local or general, as the case may be, and we say that the body is insensible. The cells are at rest. In like manner, when the connections between the brain cells are intact, the process of mentation goes on, memory combinations are made and crystallized into ideas, and we say the brain is active, the mind is conscious, the man is awake. But when the cells are exhausted, and a period of rest and recuperation is required, the connections between the cells are withdrawn, and the brain, to all intents and purposes, is resolved into its constituent elements. It is then simply a mass of unicellular organisms for the time being, an aggregation and not an organization, and, as such, it is just as incapable of thinking or of an interchange of sensations. as would be an equal bulk of protozoans dredged from the bottom of the ocean. The cells are at rest, the brain is asleep, unconscious. I submit that this hypothesis, crudely and imperfectly as it is stated, affords a complete explanation of all the facts pertaining to the phenomena of sleep. I have not space in this outline to dwell upon the particulars of the various phases of the phenomena, but the intelligent reader will supply the deficiency. In the meantime, I have but to remark that it seems to indicate the existence of a universal law of inhibition, a law which enables the subjective mind to meet all emergencies as they arise, in sickness, in health, in deadly peril, and in death. That is to say, it enables it to inhibit pain in surgery or in sickness. It enables it in health to give all the cells of the body the necessary periods of rest and recuperation. It enables it to take entire possession of the body when imminent danger threatens. And finally, it enables it to afford complete immunity from suffering in the hour of final dissolution. The most wonderful part of it all is the simplicity of the process and of the physical mechanism by which all these things are accomplished. It may all be comprehended in the simple formula, segregation of cells. It is this, together with the wide range of its usefulness, that stamps it as a law and attests its universality. It will now be obvious to the intelligent student of experimental psychology that this hypothesis affords an explanation of much that is mysterious in the phenomena of hypnotism. Students of my earlier works will remember that, following Bernheim and Leibold, I stated that there is nothing to differentiate hypnotic sleep from natural sleep, and gave many reasons for entertaining that opinion. They need not be repeated here, for they all pertain to phenomena occurring subsequently to the induction of sleep. In the years that have elapsed since the expression of that view, I have never seen any reason to change it, although it has frequently been controverted by those possessing only a superficial knowledge of the subject. It is now apparent that Leibold, whom Professor Bernheim credits with being the first to proclaim the doctrine, built better than he knew. For if my theory of sleep is correct, natural and induced sleep are identical. That is to say, the same subjective energy that induces sleep in one case induces it in the other, by the same process, and by the aid of the same histological mechanism. No one now pretends to deny the fact that the sleep of hypnotism is induced by the subjective mind, acting in obedience to the suggestions of the operator, and everybody knows that the state is brought about by inhibiting the activity of the brain cells. That the subjective mind is charged with the induction of natural sleep is evidenced by the fact that insomnia is often cured by suggestion. It possesses the power, therefore, and as it is charged with the responsibility for the well-being of the whole vital organism. No good reason can be seen for making an exception of that which is most imperatively necessary to the well-being of the organism, the rest and recuperation of the brain cells. It will now be seen that if this hypothesis is correct, or approximately correct, both natural and induced sleep are robbed of their mystery. Natural sleep is seen to be nature's method of securing the necessary intervals of bodily rest and recuperation, and the power to induce and regulate it necessarily inheres in that sleepless energy which controls, subject always to the law of suggestion, all the other physical functions and conditions. And hypnotism, or the power to induce sleep, is seen to be not a thing apart, not anything exceptional, not a mysterious power, resident somewhere, for some occult purpose, and capable only of inducing abnormal conditions of body and mind, but a concomitant of the ponder to induce natural sleep. It is governed by the same laws and restricted by the same limitations, and the same physical mechanism is employed in the same way to induce it. That is to say, it is brought about by isolating the brain cells from physical contact with each other, just as in natural sleep. In either case, the different stages of sleep are due to their more or less complete isolation, and the variant phenomena in different cases and at different times in the same subject are due to the variant degrees of isolation in different departments of the cerebral cortex. This is a subject, however, which cannot be entered upon at this time, for it is believed that the intelligent student of hypnotism will have no difficulty, under this hypothesis, in solving the various minor problems as they arise. In the meantime, my sole object has been to point out an efficient cause for the phenomenon of induced sleep and to correlate it with other similar states and conditions, with the view of showing that hypnotism is but one of the numerous phenomenal manifestations of that inhibitory energy which constitutes the conservative power of the vital organism. In a word, hypnotism is a subsidiary phase of the phenomenal manifestations of that energy. It is merely incidental to it, and not a law unto itself.